Walk into any American supermarket this week. Spend 60 seconds in the meat section. You will see a specific pattern repeat. People pick up a package of ground beef. They look at the price. They put it back down. $7 a pound, $9 a pound, $11 a pound for lean cuts. 3 blocks away from that same supermarket, in someone's apartment kitchen, a quart jar on a windowsill is producing protein at roughly 50 cents a pound. No animals, no refrigeration, no supply chain. The seeds inside that jar come from a plant most Americans have never heard of. If you're new here, subscribe. The winged bean was growing in the highland gardens of Papua New Guinea at least 2,000 years before an American agricultural scientist first examined it. Local farmers there have dozens of names for it, each one tied to a specific village, soil type, or cooking tradition. In the Philippines, it appears in markets under the name sigarilyas. In Indonesia, kechapir. In Thailand, tuapu. In every region where it is grown, it occupies the same place in the kitchen, a single plant that produces 4 separate foods from one stem. The pods, when young, taste similar to green beans and are stir-fried with garlic and chili. The seeds, when mature, are dried and cooked like soybeans. The leaves are eaten as cooked greens, comparable in nutrition to spinach. And beneath the soil, the plant produces underground tubers roughly the size of small potatoes. Those tubers contain 20% protein by weight. A regular potato contains about 5%. The winged bean tuber, before any sprouting or processing, is already 4 times more protein dense than the most widely grown tuber crop on Earth. But the actual story is in the seed. In 1975, the United States National Academy of Sciences convened a panel in Washington, D.C. The task was direct: identify tropical plants with exceptional nutritional potential that had been overlooked by Western agriculture. The panel reviewed hundreds of candidates. They selected the winged bean for a dedicated report. That report was published in 1981 under the title The Winged Bean, a high-protein crop for the tropics. Inside it, the authors used unusually vivid language for a scientific document. They called the plant a supermarket on a stalk. The phrase stuck for a reason. Laboratory analyses published in the years that followed measured the protein content of the mature seed at somewhere between 29 and 42%, depending on the variety. Beef, on a dry weight basis, comes in at around 26%. A seed that matches or exceeds the protein density of animal muscle, grown without land pressure, without feed, without slaughter, without refrigeration. That should have been the beginning of an agricultural revolution. It was not. Through the 1980s, research stations in Nigeria, India, Sri Lanka, and the Philippines launched breeding programs. They developed improved varieties. They tested cultivation methods for different climates. Agricultural development organizations promoted the winged bean as a solution to chronic protein deficiency in tropical countries. For roughly 10 years, the momentum looked real. Then funding priorities shifted. Research moved elsewhere. The programs quietly closed. The winged bean returned to the traditional regions where it had never actually disappeared, and the reason for that fade is not biological. It is economic. Rinse the seeds with fresh water. Drain again. Turn the jar on its side at an angle in a dish rack or shallow bowl, so residual water continues to drip out and air can circulate around the seeds. Standing water is the single most common cause of mold and off smells. 5th, rinse twice a day, morning and evening. Room temperature water. Gentle swirl through the mesh, drain fully. Replace the jar at its angle. 6th, position the jar correctly. Indirect light is ideal. A kitchen counter away from the window works. A cabinet with the door cracked open works. Direct sunlight heats the seeds, accelerates bacterial growth, and produces a bitter taste in the final sprouts. 7th, watch for the visual markers that tell you where you are in the cycle. Day 2, the seeds swell and show small white root tips. Day 3, the roots lengthen and the first green cotyledons begin to separate. Day 4, the cotyledons expand and take on a pale green-yellow color. Day 5, maximum nutritional density before the stem begins to elongate and divert energy away from the cotyledons. Harvest on day 5. Cut the sprouts at the base with clean scissors, or lift the entire mat if you used a tray. Rinse the harvest under cold water. Drain thoroughly. Store in the refrigerator in an airtight container with a paper towel to absorb excess moisture. Fresh sprouts keep well for 5 to 7 days, but flavor and texture are best within the first 48 hours. The trick that turns this from an experiment into a system is to start the next batch on the same day you harvest. 2 jars in rotation, offset by 2 or 3 days, gives you continuous fresh sprouts without gaps. Now, the part most channels skip. Sprouts grown in warm, humid conditions can occasionally harbor salmonella or E. coli bacteria. Not because sprouting is dangerous, but because the warm, wet environment that makes seeds germinate is also ideal for bacterial growth if contamination is present on the seed surface. The Centers for Disease Control has documented roughly 40 outbreaks linked to commercial sprouts over the past 3 decades. For home growers, the risk is substantially lower because batches are small and conditions are controlled. 3 simple practices eliminate almost all remaining risk. Inspect seeds carefully before use. Use cool water for rinses rather than warm water. Cook the sprouts before eating. If you are pregnant, elderly, very young, or immune compromised, brief stir-frying or adding them to a hot soup destroys the relevant bacteria. For healthy adults, raw sprouts from clean seeds grown with twice daily rinses are safe and preserve the full enzyme and vitamin content that cooking reduces. If you buy 1 bag of winged bean seeds today and soak them tonight, you'll be harvesting fresh protein by the weekend. Next week, a plant that produces more vitamin C per gram than any citrus fruit, grown in backyard hedgerows across North America and mistaken for a weed by almost everyone who sees it. Subscribe so you do not miss it. The winged bean has 4 traits that make it ideal for household food security. Every one of those same traits makes it unattractive to commercial agriculture. It is a legume. That means it forms nodules on its roots that contain nitrogen-fixing bacteria. The plant pulls nitrogen directly from the air and converts it into usable fertility. A winged bean field requires no synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. Over multiple seasons, it actively improves the soil it grows in. Industrial agriculture depends on recurring fertilizer sales. A crop that fertilizes itself eliminates that revenue stream. It is perennial in tropical climates. A single planting produces harvests for multiple years without replanting. Industrial agriculture depends on annual seed purchases. A crop that regrows from its own roots breaks that cycle. It produces 4 separate food products from one plant: tuber, seed, pod, and leaf. Industrial agriculture depends on specialized crops with single-purpose processing streams. A crop that feeds a family from a single stem has no slot in a centralized food system. And it thrives without pesticides. The plant's natural biochemistry protects it from most of the pests and diseases that devastate commercial bean crops. Industrial agriculture depends on a constant flow of crop protection chemicals. A crop that defends itself eliminates that market. Here is what makes that pattern particularly frustrating. The winged bean is not obscure because it failed in trials. It is not rare because it is difficult to grow. It is not missing from American grocery stores because consumers rejected it. It is missing because every quality that makes it extraordinary as a food makes it invisible to the institutions that decide what food reaches shelves. Subscribe if you want more of these stories. Now, here's the part almost nobody explains. You do not need a tropical farm to access the most nutritionally dense version of this plant. You do not need land. You do not need sunlight. You do not even need the full growing cycle. What you need is to understand what happens when a seed germinates, because the 5-day sprouted version of the winged bean seed is, measurably, the single most nutritionally concentrated form this plant ever reaches in its entire life. A dry seed is a storage unit. It holds everything the future plant will need to begin growing, locked in a dormant chemical state that protects it from insects, bacteria, and fungi. Those protections are called anti-nutrients. They include phytic acid, which binds to minerals and prevents absorption, trypsin inhibitors, which block protein digestion, lectins, which irritate the digestive tract. When a seed comes into contact with water at the right temperature, the dormancy ends. Enzymes activate. The chemistry shifts from defense to growth. A study published in the Journal of Food Science and Technology measured these changes in winged bean seeds over a 5-day sprouting cycle. Trypsin inhibitors decreased by roughly 60 to 80%. Phytic acid fell by similar margins. Lectins were substantially reduced. Vitamin C, which is essentially absent in the dry seed, rose to levels comparable to a serving of citrus fruit by day 5. Protein digestibility climbed from roughly 65% in the raw seed to over 85% in the sprouted form. This last number is the one that matters for the title of this video. The raw protein content of the winged bean seed does not increase during sprouting. What changes is how much of that protein your body can actually absorb. A 5-day-old winged bean sprout delivers usable protein at roughly the same efficiency as cooked fish. 1 handful of sprouts at peak concentration provides more bioavailable protein than a quarter cup of most legume flours. And the practical math tells the rest of the story. A standard 12-inch sprouting tray, set up once and rotated with a fresh batch every 5 days, produces roughly 100 grams of dry matter equivalent protein material per cycle. At a protein concentration of 35%, that is 35 grams of usable protein per 5-day cycle. 6 cycles per month. 2 kilograms of protein per year from a single window space. Getting 2 kilograms of protein from beef requires raising a cow for 18 to 24 months. That cow consumes roughly 8,000 kilograms of feed. It requires grazing land, veterinary care, slaughter infrastructure, transport, refrigeration, and distribution. Your sprouting jar requires tap water and 5 minutes of attention per day. One of those 2 systems breaks during a fuel shortage, a supply chain disruption, or a refrigeration failure. The other one does not. That contrast is not theoretical. It is the reason several governments, including Singapore and the United Arab Emirates, have begun funding urban sprouting research as a national food security measure. You do not need a national program. You need a glass jar. The 5-day method is simple enough that a child can follow it, but the details matter because shortcuts cause failures. First, source real seeds. The winged bean is sold dry in most Asian grocery stores under names like Goa bean or asparagus pea. Online seed suppliers like Baker Creek, Heirloom Seeds, True Leaf Market, and Sprout People sell untreated seeds specifically labeled for sprouting. 1 pound of dried seeds costs between $8 and $15 and will run your kitchen for roughly 3 months. Do not use seeds sold for planting outdoors. Those are frequently treated with fungicides that are not food grade. Second, inspect the seeds before use. Spread them on a plate. Remove anything cracked, visibly moldy, shriveled, or darker than the rest of the batch. Damaged seeds are the main entry point for bacteria during the germination process. 30 seconds of inspection saves a failed batch. Third, soak them correctly. Place 2 to 3 tablespoons of seeds in a clean glass quart jar. Cover the top with a piece of fine mesh or cheesecloth held by a rubber band. Fill the jar with room temperature water, roughly 3 times the volume of the seeds. Let them soak between 12 and 24 hours. Shorter soaks produce uneven germination. Longer soaks invite bacterial growth. Fourth, drain completely after the soak.